This afternoon, the incident at the Melbourne Derby on December 17 shocked Australian football. It shocked international football. It's something that Football Australia is not proud about. Since these events occurred, Football Australia has worked closely and collaboratively with the Victorian Police to identify and sanction individual perpetrators, which has resulted in Football Australia banning 17 individuals, and as part of those 17 individuals, 3 have received life bans. In parallel with the individual judicial processes, Football Australia also issued Melbourne Victory with a show cause notice on 19 December. The club responded to the show cause notice on 21 December and provided further information for Football Australia. After considering the club's response in the issued show cause notice and the measures since taken by the club, as well as the preliminary sanctions that were handed down by Football Australia on 23 December 2022, Football Australia has found that Melbourne Victory has brought the game into disrepute following the unacceptable actions of the club's active supporters during the match, the round 8 match between Melbourne City and Melbourne Victory on Saturday 17th of December at Amy Park in Melbourne. We're also very aware that this is not the first time that we have had an issue with Melbourne Victory. In 2016, we had an invasion of the pitch. In 2022, we had the Cavallo incident. In 2022, we also had the 2021 Australia Cup, because it was played in 2022, issue where fans also damaged LED and entered the pitch when they were celebrating a goal. So this is really an aggravation of those issues, and I wanted to make that point before we deliver what the sanction is. So the sanction that Football Australia has handed down is as follows, and I'm going to walk you through the financial and also the sporting sanctions that apply. As to the financial sanctions, there is a total of 550,000 Australian dollars in total financial sanctions to the club, and this comprises 450,000 Australian dollars in fines and damages, and a further 100,000 in lost revenue due to the sporting sanctions that I'm going to run you through. The sporting sanctions are as follows. They will require the club for home games, to block access to select seating behind the goals and otherwise restrict seating in the north end of Amy Park to registered club members for the remainder of the 22-23 A-League men's season and the 22-23 A-League men finals season, should Melbourne Victory still be playing. And secondly, for away matches, there will be no specifically allocated club supporter seating at away games for Melbourne Victory, and this will be in place for the remainder of the 22-23 A-League season, as well as the 22-23 A-League men's final season, should Melbourne Victory be in that final series still. The sporting sanctions do also include a suspended 10-point deduction, which may be triggered for each instance of serious supporter misconduct during the remainder of this current season, and also for the following 3 A-League men's seasons. So that means that this sanction will not conclude until the 25-26 A-League men's season concludes. And finally, I want to talk about the match that was abandoned, because Football Australia has also determined, with competition integrity at the heart of our decision-making, that the 22-23 A-League men round of 8 match between Melbourne City and Melbourne Victory that was abandoned will be replayed in April 2023. Furthermore, the match will be replayed from the 22nd minute, and it will start with the scoreline being 1-0 to Melbourne City, which was the score and the exact minute, the 22nd minute, that the match was abandoned. A detailed outline of these sanctions are provided in the media release that you have in front of you now and that's been issued publicly only a few minutes ago. I just want to say in general comments that the scenes at the Melbourne Derby were the worst witnessed in Australian football during the A-League era. We cannot let this happen again in our game. So we believe that a strong sanction, both financial and also sporting, is warranted and justified in these circumstances. These sanctions are reflective of our desire to remove this behaviour from the sport, and in particular those that act in such a way, and we want them out of our sport, as we've shown in our individual bans that have been issued. We need to remember that this sanction against Melbourne Victory is part of a broader response to the incident. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we've issued preliminary sanctions on Melbourne Victory that have been respected, I might add, and we've also issued 17 bans to individuals, including 3 life bans, and there will be more to follow as we continue to cooperate with the Victorian Police. The field of play is a sacred place, and it's the workplace of our players and our match officials, and this needs to be paramount in football. Those individuals that illegally entered the field of play caused damage and verbally and physically assaulted players and officials, and they really crossed the line, and that is completely unacceptable in Australian football. We've worked closely with the Victorian Police to identify these individuals and will continue to do so to ensure that those that display antisocial and criminal behaviour at football events are weeded out of our sport, and that was a promise that we made the day after the event took place. We hope through our response to this incident that the Australian football community can see that we've kept to our word, we've acted swiftly and decisively, and we strike out this behaviour from our game. Going forward, I just want to talk for just a moment on what we are doing proactively. We will establish a task force that Football Australia will establish and also manage. It will be a task force that will include various stakeholders and also experts. It will include both the Victoria and New South Wales Police, at least they will be invited to participate. It will include representatives of the APL and also clubs throughout Australia, and also experts that can support the Australian game in ensuring things like flares don't enter the pitch, and that our stadiums and our matches are safe for our community. The terms of reference of this newly created task force will be defined soon and will include many measures, and we'll talk about that soon in the future, but it will be at its heart there to stop and to provide measures to stop antisocial behaviour at A-League matches. In closing, we believe that these sanctions are fair. We think they're reasonable. We think they're justified to keep our community happy. We also think that they have been focused and specific to ensure that the individuals that we target ensure that the rest of the 2 million supporters of Australian football are not tainted with the same brush. And we do ask the community that, given the strength of both these sanctions and also the individual bans that are in place and that will continue, that we get focused on what 2023 will be for Australian football, and we do believe that it will be the best year for the game in our history. We have a great national team content that we'll be announcing soon, both the Socceroos and the Matildas. The A-League men's and women's is in full swing. We'll start the Australia Cup soon, and of course we have the Women's World Cup, which will be the biggest sporting event on our shores since the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. Thank you.
James, we'll take questions from the floor and we'll come to Zoom shortly. Those who are remotely on Zoom, if you do wish to ask a question, do raise your hand. We'll come to you shortly. Vince Regari.
Just, JJ, 2 specific questions to the sanctions themselves. One, can you break down just how the financial element works, like why there's 450 and why there's 100 different categories, and also why FA decided not to deduct points now and instead leave them with a heavy penalty hanging for 3.5 seasons? Yeah,
so I'll talk through the financial question first. There's a penalty imposed of 150,000 Australian dollars. There is a further suspended penalty of 100,000 Australian dollars. There's damages that were caused by the Victory spectators to the LED boards and other seats throughout the stadium that amount to 150 Australian dollars. There'll be an additional $50,000 that will be paid to the APL for the replay of the match, and there is a future loss of ticketing revenue as a result of the sporting sanctions that are in place, which will be a minimum of $100,000. That's how we get to the total number of $550,000 in financial damages. As for the sporting sanctions, deducting points was considered, and where we decided is we went back to what ultimately is important, and that's the integrity of our competitions. And we felt that if we were to implement a point deduction now, it wasn't the most effective way of deterring the fans that would attend future matches from stopping this kind of behaviour. It is a significant sanction, although it is suspended. I want to run you through that. For the next 3 years post this year, if there is an incident by a spectator, if an incident occurs like we've seen several times in 2022 and also in 2016, if a spectator runs onto the pitch, if there's an assault, there will be an automatic 10-point deduction. And if that were to occur, that will destroy Melbourne Victory's city. So the logic is to put the responsibility on the spectators to help us and to help the club self-regulate, because should any of their colleagues do that, there are catastrophic damages for Melbourne Victory.
Is that bar though? Like someone has to run onto the field and assault a player for the points deduction to be
It would need to be a serious misconduct, and I can only give you examples of what we've already seen. We've seen fans run onto the pitch. That would be a trigger. We've seen fans assault a player and a referee. That would be a trigger. So if there is an issue at this level, then those triggers will come into place automatically.
Luke?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how the Victory are actually placed to handle these fines. We've seen various headlines about the state of finances around the league, but more recently in Victory.
Look, it is a hefty fine, and it's something that we need to be an independent regulator. That is what occurred during the unbundling, and we need to look at this with independent eyes. And we acknowledge it is significant. But it's one that we hope changes culture. We hope drives change, because it will hurt. So that's all I can say about that, Luke.
John's typical investigators. How does this address the anger that's still out there among fans regarding the selling of the grand finals decision?
This decision, I want to be very clear, is made independently of that decision. I think the A-League grand final issue is something that needs to be discussed with the APL. They need to continue to communicate the reasons for those decisions, because the APL was the body that made that decision. I think as a regulator of the A-League, we can't take these issues into consideration. We need to look at the evidence that's in front of us, and the evidence that we've looked at is a number of spectators that were sitting in the north end that entered the field. And as I said in my opening remarks, the field is a workplace for our players and our referees. It's a very sacred place in sport, and when individuals cross that line, we've got to focus on solving that issue, and that's what these sanctions have been focused on.
Can I ask, talking through in reference to the game being replayed, can you kind of walk us through your thinking there and why it wasn't simply just a case of 3-0 City and move on?
Yeah, look, this was debated at length. It was thought about, and there's two reasons. One is competition integrity, and whoever wins the competition, whether it be the league or eventually the finals, they need to be remembered, in my view, as the team that won it on the pitch and didn't get help from administrations through sanctions, for example. So whether you're deducting points from Melbourne Victory or you're giving points to Melbourne City, it is possible, and we have seen it in Australian sport and also international football, but it's something that we wanted to ensure, if we could avoid. It was a very last measure, because We want the integrity of this season to remain intact. That was something that was very important to us. And the other was a player health and safety issue. We looked at the dates and the calendar of when this match could be played, and it actually became very difficult to play the match before the next Melbourne derby, which is on the 18th of February. And we just felt that it wasn't appropriate and wasn't needed in this situation. We think that the combination of the individual bans, the largest financial sanction ever imposed in Australian football, together with the sporting sanctions that we've opposed, is fair, but also sends a very strong message that what happened should never happen again in Australian football.
We'll go to Luke again, and then we'll go to some online questions.
When last we spoke, I think you said that you were happy for Danny to, and this delves into the grand final issue, but just in terms of something outside of this, you were happy for Danny to try and repair the relationship with the fans.
Yep.
And you were going to focus on the punishments, but
Yep.
has he been keeping you up to date? We know there's been various measures or impending meetings with supporters about trying to get everyone back on the same page. Can you just give us a little update there while we've got you?
Yeah, look, the primary focus of conversations between Danny and myself have been on the replay of the match. We've had to work collaboratively with the APL around that issue, not the sanctions in general, but around the replay of the match. What I can say is that the APL have been very cooperative. Danny in particular has tried to work with us to the best of his ability, and I think I should credit Danny for that. He has made it possible for us to play this match in April, because it's a very congested calendar, because we need to remember the World Cup was played, the A-League didn't get played, so we already have a very congested fixture list. It would have been easy for the APL to turn around and make it difficult. They haven't. They've helped us do that. As for the Sydney sanctions, it's been the second discussion that we've had since the Melbourne derby. The conversations have been, my message to Danny has been, look, you need to continue to explain the logic behind the decision of APL, and there is some financial logic behind their decision. Now, that needs to be explained, I think, to the fans, because there is some reasons that the APL have taken that decision. I'm not the person to go into the detail around the reasons for the decision. The APL is, but certainly our view is that continual dialogue with the fans to walk them through the rationale behind the decision is needed to try to reduce some of that tension that I think it still does exist.
Right, we'll just go online first. We're going to go to Joey Lynch from ESPN. To be fair, we'll give Joey 2 questions in a row for fluidity. James, if you can just keep looking at the camera while we do that. Joey, we'll cross to you.
Thank you, James, for your time, and thank you to your team for putting this Zoom on. My first question would be these triggering events that are in the release that can result in further sanctions. Are they for every victory fixture, not only A-League men, but also if there are events at A-League women fixtures or NPL fixtures as well? Will issues at those fixtures result in further sanctions?
It's the focus here, Joey, is on the A-League men's. It's for the remainder of this A-League men's season, and it's for the next 3 A-League men's seasons. But it's A-League men's. It doesn't include A-League women's. It doesn't include NPL. It's A-League men's.
And previous Football Australia releases also highlighted that investigations were also taking place into Melbourne City fans' conduct during the derby. Are you able to provide an update on what those are?
Yes, I can. We obviously have prioritised our investigation on the individuals that entered the pitch, and I think what I hope you've seen throughout this process is we've got more tools in our toolkits now. We've been able to issue individual fan bans, and we've also been able to run show cause processes. And in future, you're going to see, as a regulator, us be able to use other mechanisms such as club licensing rules or transfer system sanctions as well. So there will be further investigations against individuals. We haven't yet finished that part of the investigation. There were more Melbourne Victory supporters that entered the pitch, and we'll continue to work with the Victorian Police on that issue. We are aware of an individual from the other end of the stadium, the Melbourne City Stadium, who we're working together with the club and also the Victorian Police to sanction as well, because we are aware that there was a flare thrown onto the pitch. So that is our focus going forward. But I do want to remind everyone that with these sort of issues, the head of this issue is the many individuals that ran onto the pitch and assaulted a player and a coach, and we really need to focus our time and energy, which is what we've done, on addressing those issues.
Thanks, Joey. We'll go to Stephen Pauletti next online.
Hi, Dan. Stephen Pauletti from the Inner Sanctum. Thank you for your time today. I know Joey touched on it a little bit, and I know that these sanctions only apply to the A-League men's program, but I guess what preventative measures may be put in place to stop similar incidents happening at an A-League women's match? Because we've seen this before. We've seen the Tegan Micah incident from a couple of years ago. But as you mentioned at the start as well, it's a long-standing issue and accumulation of a number of incidents.
Yeah, look, my first reaction to that is it's a legal one. This is a show cause process against a club, and the focus of the conduct occurred at an A-League men's match. That's why the focus of the sporting and financial sanctions are on the A-League men's, because that's the competition that the Melbourne Victory team played in. We are aware that this has happened, or I should say there have been other issues in other parts of the game over the years, and that's precisely why we've set up this task force. This task force will look at measures to not only ensure that the community is safe, but also we'll be looking at things such as use of technology to ensure that individual bans are very well implemented. So this will be the work of the task force. The task force, it will look forward. It won't look back. It's not there to sanction. It's there to provide recommendations to the FA board about how we can be at the top of global standards when it comes to security in stadiums.
We've got time for about 4 or 5 other questions. Those on the line, if you have a question, please raise your hand. For now, we'll come back to the room. Tim from SBS.
James, has there been any response so far from Melbourne Victory?
Look, we obviously worked with Melbourne Victory, worked through the interim sanction, and I want to say that Melbourne Victory fully cooperated with Football Australia. They did work through us. We have spoken to Melbourne Victory in advance of handing down this sanction, and we hope that Melbourne Victory accept that there are some issues at Victory. It's not the first time, and accept the ban. It is up to Melbourne Victory if they would like to appeal our sanction. I hope they don't. We're willing to go all the way if we have to. That would be all the way to Switzerland. We're prepared for that, and we've designed this sanction with that possibility in mind. But I hope that common sense will prevail, that Melbourne Victory will accept the sanction, and we can work together as we did with the interim sanction to change the direction of this event that occurred in December.
J.O., how do you police stadium bans? Because it's not as easy as it sounds. I mean, do you have to stick 17 faces next to the door at every ground going forward? It seems like a very difficult thing to actually execute in practice. Is it difficult?
It's complex to implement. It's not impossible though, Vince. It does require close working relationships with law enforcement. It does require close cooperation with stakeholders around the game, and in particular competition administrators, where information that's somewhat sensitive needs to be shared, and the information needs to allow the competition administrator to identify the individuals. There also needs to be strong sanctions in case those who are banned do enter. And you might have seen in the last batch of individual sanctions that we issued 2 or 3 days ago, I think it was, where one individual was banned for life. And this was someone who had previously been banned and had effectively done similar conduct again. So I think strong measures do deter individuals themselves from entering, but sure, we do need to work with stadium, with law enforcement, with stakeholders. And then the other point I would say is it's not just entering stadiums that the bans apply to. it's also registering with players or as players. And that's something that is quite easy to implement because we control the registration system across the country, and it's very easy for us to block individuals that have bans in place.
Adam Peacock?
James, Melbourne Victory home games average, say, 15,000, so you've got 2,000 or 3,000 in the north end when it's packed and jumping, which leaves a hefty balance of fans. What do you say to those fans about how they not support that club, that's their decision, but how they get involved in game day going forward? Are they affected in any way, shape or form?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Adam, and I want to say that we've spent a lot of time thinking about how our sanctions can not harm the vast majority of good fans, because the majority of Melbourne Victory fans, the very large majority, are good people, and they go to the game to enjoy it. They go for the right reasons, so they'll be able to go to matches. There will be some restrictions in place, particularly if they're at the north end of the stadium. But my message to them is we've tried to ensure that you can still go to matches. That's why we didn't implement a match behind closed doors, for example, so you can. But please help us if you see something that's not right in the stadium, call it out. That would be helpful for us, and it's, I think, the right thing to do for your club.
We'll go back online. We've got time for, we'll go to Joey online and we'll finish with Vince Regari. Joey Lynch, we'll come to you.
Thank you. Just, James, the previous preliminary sanctions handed down by FA covered the original rivalry game in Adelaide this week. I'm assuming these now replace those sanctions?
No, Joey. So those sanctions will be in place until January the 15th. So they will stay in place until then.
Any follow-up, Joey?
No, just want a clarification. Thank you.
No problem. We'll finish with Vince Regari in the room.
James, I know there's already been an announcement about Tom Glover and that his involvement in this incident on this occasion can't be repunished because the referee dealt with it at the time. Has anyone at FA or APL or his club spoken to him about it maybe not being a good idea for players to pick up flares, and whether he was doing it deliberately or not, to throw it towards fans?
Yeah, look, I will give Tommy a call. I actually have spoken with Tommy straight after the event and wanted to check in on his well-being. What I will say with this one, it's quite technical because it's a player whose conduct, and I'll just call it conduct, occurred during a match, and ultimately the referee, as per the laws of the game, is responsible for those calls. It's not administration's. In this case, the referee has said very clearly in his match report that Tommy Glover didn't. There was no misconduct by Tommy Glover. We did, to make sure that we covered all bases, also ensure that the match review panel was convened, and they also found that given the referee had not missed the incident, they actually didn't have jurisdiction. So we did go down the different pathways with Tom Glover. I think he gets off on this occasion, but it is something that I will be talking to Tommy about and say, look, we do need some protocols in place to educate the players about, because they're not in place, and that's something this task force will look at. But don't do that next time.